This is the documented story of a currency that has lost 96% of its purchasing power since 1913, and the verified data proving it is still happening right now. The dollar in your wallet looks the same as it always did, spends the same as it always did, but what it can actually buy has been shrinking for over a century, and in the last 5 years that shrinkage moved faster than it had in 4 decades. No speculation here, no predictions of collapse, no doom. What follows is the numbers, the dates, the verified statistics, and the historical turning points that explain exactly how we got here, and exactly what the data shows today. $1 in 1913 carries the purchasing power of approximately 3.5 cents today, and that figure comes not from a critic or a gold bug, but from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the same federal agency that tracks inflation every single month. Put it another way, $100 saved in 1913 and kept in a drawer would buy roughly $3.50 worth of goods in 2026. 96.5 cents of every original dollar gone. Now, 1913 might feel like ancient history, so let's bring this forward to a timeline most people watching this actually lived through. $100 saved in 1975 had the purchasing power of just $16.40 by 2025, a loss of 84% inside a single human lifetime, and that calculation comes from an analysis of official BLS data published by Truth in Accounting in September 2025. Go back to 1950 and the picture is nearly identical. $100 in 1950 was worth only $13.92 by the year 2000, an 86% loss across 50 years. And for anyone who thinks this is only a long-run problem, consider what happened in just the last 5 years. $100 in 2020 could buy only about $80 worth of goods and services by 2025. A 20% loss before the decade was even half over. None of these are estimates built on modeling or projection. Every one of them is a calculation derived from Consumer Price Index data the federal government publishes, and the trend across all of them runs in exactly one direction. To understand why this keeps happening, you need to go back to the night of August 15, 1971, because that single Sunday evening changed the rules of money for every person alive today. President Richard Nixon went on national television and announced that the United States would no longer allow foreign governments to exchange their dollars for gold, ending a system that had governed the entire global economy for nearly 3 decades. That system was called Bretton Woods, built in 1944 when 44 nations gathered in New Hampshire in the final stretch of World War II and agreed on a simple arrangement. The US dollar would be pegged to gold at $35 per ounce, and every other major currency in the world would be pegged to the dollar. Gold backed the anchor, and the anchor held everything else in place. For that to keep working, the United States had to maintain enough gold to cover the dollars it issued, and by the late 1960s that had become impossible. Military spending on Vietnam, expanding foreign aid, and domestic monetary growth meant far more dollars were circulating internationally than the US held gold to redeem, and the pressure became visible in the days immediately before Nixon's speech. Switzerland had already left the Bretton Woods system. Britain had requested $3 billion in gold be moved from Fort Knox. France, so alarmed about the value of its dollar holdings, had sent an actual ship to New York City to physically retrieve French gold from American vaults. Nixon's answer was to close the gold window entirely, and what was announced as a temporary measure was never reversed. By 1973, all major currencies were floating against the dollar, the fixed exchange rate era was finished, and the era of unlimited monetary expansion had quietly begun, because here's the thing. Before 1971, the gold standard operated as a natural brake on how many dollars could be created. Once that brake came off, the Federal Reserve and the US government had something they had never fully possessed before, the ability to expand the money supply without a hard ceiling. There is a metric called M2, and it measures the broad money supply, cash, checking accounts, savings accounts, and money market funds, essentially all the liquid money that exists in the American economy at any given moment. In January 2026, the Federal Reserve reported M2 had reached $22.44 trillion, but the number itself is less striking than the speed at which it got there. At the end of 2019, M2 stood at $15.33 trillion. 8 months later, by the end of July 2020, it had jumped to $18.3 trillion, a 20% increase before the first year of the pandemic had even closed. At the peak of that expansion, M2 was growing at more than 23% year over year, and to understand how extraordinary that was, Federal Reserve records going back to 1981 show that M2 growth had never once exceeded 15% in a single year. Not during the stagflation of the 1970s, not during the financial crisis of 2008, not at any point in recorded modern monetary history. Approximately 29% of the entire current money supply came into existence after January 2020, and since 2009, M2 has grown by roughly 152%, meaning the money supply today is about 2.5 times what it was before the global financial crisis. There is a counterargument worth laying out directly. Some economists point out that money supply growth tracking economic growth is not automatically inflationary, and the Bank of England published a widely cited 2014 paper explaining that in modern economies, banks create money in response to actual economic activity. Loans create deposits rather than the other way around. That argument has real merit in normal conditions. But the scale of expansion between 2020 and 2022 was not normal. It was without precedent in the modern Fed's history, and the inflation that followed, the largest surge in 40 years, did not arrive as a surprise to anyone who had been watching the money supply data. Between January 2021 and December 2024, the Consumer Price Index climbed 19.4%, and that figure comes directly from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, not from an alternative measure or an adjusted calculation. In the single year spanning 2021 to 2022, purchasing power fell 7.4%, meaning $1 in 2022 could only buy what 92.6 cents bought the year before, the worst annual drop in 4 decades. City-level data from the BLS makes this concrete. Between 2024 and early 2026, San Diego saw a cumulative price increase of 4.77%, New York 5.37%, Philadelphia 5.33%. As of March 2026, consumer prices are still rising at 3.3% year over year, still above the Federal Reserve's stated 2% target. There is an ongoing debate among economists about whether even that 3.3% captures the full picture. Critics of the CPI methodology argue that changes made since the 1980s, including hedonic quality adjustments, substitution effects, geometric weighting, and how housing costs are calculated, understate true inflation by somewhere between 2 and 4 percentage points annually. Defenders of those same methods argue they more accurately reflect how consumers actually behave when prices rise, substituting cheaper goods when expensive ones become out of reach. Both positions have credentialed economists behind them, and the debate has been running for decades without resolution. What sits outside that debate is what the Bureau of Labor Statistics itself confirms. $100 in 2020 buys approximately $80 worth of goods in 2025, and that number is the floor, not the ceiling. The money supply story has a companion, and it involves a number that has grown so large it has become almost impossible to hold in the mind at once. The U.S. national debt now exceeds $36 trillion, representing approximately 122% of GDP, which means the total debt load is larger than the entire annual economic output of the country. Back in 2001, the last year the federal government ran a budget surplus, that debt stood at $5.8 trillion and represented 55% of GDP. In roughly 25 years, it has grown more than 6 times over in nominal terms, and the cost of carrying it has become its own crisis. In 2024, for the first time in American history, annual interest payments on the national debt crossed $1 trillion, and that money produces nothing, no infrastructure, no research, no services. It exists purely to service the debt already accumulated. Debt payments now consume more than 20% of all federal tax revenue, and the United States spends a larger share of its GDP on interest, 3.9%, than any other major advanced economy. In 2023, Fitch Ratings downgraded the U.S. credit rating, citing rising debt and fiscal dysfunction, a formal signal from one of the world's leading financial arbiters that American fiscal management had deteriorated to a level warranting documented concern. The connection to the dollar's purchasing power runs through a simple logic. The structural pressure to manage this debt creates ongoing incentives to keep interest rates low, to allow the money supply to expand, and to let moderate to high inflation persist, because inflation reduces the real value of existing debt. The government, as the world's largest debtor, effectively benefits when the dollar loses purchasing power, and the people who hold savings, fixed pensions, or wage-based incomes are the ones who absorb that cost. If you want to understand what international institutions, foreign governments, and global markets actually believe about the dollar's trajectory, the place to look isn't press releases or policy statements, It's the allocation decisions those same institutions are making with real money. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves, the percentage of world savings held in dollars by central banks, stood at approximately 71% in 1999. By the end of 2025, that share had dropped to 56.8%, and according to IMF data released in March 2026, that reading represents the lowest level since 1994, a 31-year low. Foreign ownership of U.S. Treasury securities, one of the clearest measures of confidence in American debt, fell to 30% of the Treasury market by early 2025, down from a peak above 50% during the global financial crisis. The U.S. dollar index, which tracks the dollar's value against a basket of major currencies, fell approximately 9 to 10% across the full year of 2025, and the Atlantic Council noted a further 1.2% decline in January 2026 alone. And then there is what central banks are actively buying instead. More than 1,000 tons of gold per year for 3 consecutive years, well above the historical average of around 500 tons annually, and the acceleration traces back to a specific moment. In 2022, Western nations froze approximately $300 billion of Russia's foreign exchange reserves, and that action sent every central bank on Earth the same message. Dollar-denominated assets can be seized through the financial system, and gold cannot. Since that moment, central bank gold buying has not slowed, and by mid-2025, gold had surpassed the euro to become the world's second-largest global reserve asset behind only the dollar itself. When Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, gold was fixed at $35 per ounce under Bretton Woods, a price essentially unchanged since 1944. On January 29, 2026, gold hit an all-time high of $5,595.42 per ounce. That is not simply a dramatic number. It is a 55-year mathematical record of what happened to the dollar's value measured against a fixed physical asset. The gold did not change. The dollar did. In 2025 alone, gold gained between 65 and 72%, its strongest single-year performance since 1979, which happened to be the peak of the stagflation era, when inflation had been running at double digits for years and the dollar was in deep crisis. Since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic on March 11, 2020, gold has appreciated approximately 98%, nearly doubling inside 5 years. J.P. Morgan's Global Research Division forecasts gold could reach $5,000 per ounce by the fourth quarter of 2026, with $6,000 per ounce described as a longer-term possibility, supported by central bank demand projected at around 585 tons per quarter through 2026, and J.P. Morgan named one of the explicit drivers of that demand as reduced demand for the U.S. dollar. Central banks aren't accumulating gold simply because they favor the metal. They are accumulating gold because they want less exposure to the dollar, and they are putting that preference into action at a scale not seen since the late 1960s. Purchasing power decline is not a neutral event that touches everyone equally. It redistributes wealth silently and automatically every single day, and the direction of that redistribution follows a clear pattern. The U.S. government, as the world's largest debtor, benefits directly when the dollar loses value, because the trillions borrowed in the past get repaid with dollars worth less than those originally borrowed. Property owners with fixed-rate mortgages benefit for the same reason. Someone who bought a home in 2019 with a 30-year fixed mortgage at 3.5% saw their real debt burden decrease by more than 20% by 2025, while their equity grew, a quiet wealth transfer that required no action on their part. And on the institutional side, just 5 asset managers, Fidelity, Schwab, J.P. Morgan, Vanguard, and BlackRock, controlled 71% of money market fund growth since 2022, as expanding liquidity and rising asset prices concentrated financial management further into fewer hands. The people on the other side of that transfer are easier to identify. Retirees living on fixed pensions or Social Security receive the same nominal payment year after year, while what that payment buys quietly contracts, and Sheila Weinberg of Truth in Accounting described it plainly. A $100 Social Security benefit from 1975 carried the purchasing power of $16.40 by 2025. Wage earners whose salaries typically lag inflation lost ground even in years when they received raises, because a raise that didn't outpace 19.4% cumulative inflation between 2021 and 2024 was effectively a pay cut in real terms. Traditional savers who held cash in accounts earning well under 1% while inflation ran at 7 or 8% lost real purchasing power every single month, with no action required on anyone's part to make that happen. At the start of this video, the number was 96%. The share of purchasing power the dollar has lost since 1913. Let's come back to it now because that number did not happen in a single crash, and it did not happen because of one bad decision or one bad administration. It accumulated through a century of compounding choices: the creation of a central bank with discretion over money supply, the abandonment of the gold standard under the pressure of war spending and trade deficits, the transition to a pure fiat currency on that Sunday night in August 1971, and then decade after decade of deficit spending that has now produced $36 trillion in debt, more than $1 trillion a year in interest payments, and a fiscal deficit running at 6.5% of GDP, the highest among G7 nations. The recent acceleration was not without cause. 19.4% cumulative inflation from 2021 to 2024, the worst annual purchasing power drop in 40 years, a dollar index down 9 to 10% in 2025. All of it followed the creation of 29% of the entire money supply inside 5 years, in an economy already carrying structural imbalances that had been building for decades. International markets confirmed what domestic data showed. The dollar's reserve share sits at a 31-year low. Central banks are buying gold at twice the historical rate. Foreign ownership of U.S. treasuries is in long-term decline. Gold has gained nearly 100% since March 2020. None of that means the dollar collapses tomorrow, and the data is clear on this point too. The dollar still appears on one side of approximately 89% of global foreign exchange transactions. Total foreign holdings of U.S. treasuries hit a record $9.35 trillion in November 2025. The dollar has weathered serious crises before and remained the dominant global currency. But still dominant and holding its value are two entirely different claims, and the official government-sourced, central bank-verified record of the last 113 years is unambiguous on exactly one point. Every year you hold a dollar, it buys less than it did the year before. That is not a forecast. It is the documented history of every year since the Federal Reserve opened its doors, and the proof has never been easier to find.